All right, welcome to Halitics on this, what is it, the ninth day of May, 2023. And the presidential election coming up next year. I know we have endless election cycles, right? It never ends. Yesterday, we talked a lot about how the Democrats are preventing you from hearing the candidates debate, the Democratic challengers to Joe Biden. They will not allow you, or they're going to do everything they can possibly do to prevent Joe Biden from having to be confronted by challengers. I think it's a bad idea. I think it's a bad idea because I don't want to see Donald Trump reelected. I don't want to see Ron DeSantis president. And frankly, I don't really want to see Joe Biden reelected either. I want us to have an option who is a progressive, or at least is going to run as a progressive and can be held to account perhaps as a progressive. I also think that even if the nominee is Joe Biden, he will be better served, and the Democratic Party would be better served by having robust debates in the primaries coming up as soon as perhaps this fall. There are two credible challengers. Now, I say they're credible. I say that RFK Jr. and Marianne Williamson are credible because of their polling numbers, because they're both doing better than just about anybody did in the last cycle, except for Bernie and Biden. And there were like 20 plus people on the debate stage in 2019, heading into the 2020 primaries. So I don't know what I know what the argument is. We heard Simone Sanders say it. You've got an incumbent Democrat. He runs the party. He's not going to face a challenger. Fine. In a debate. Fine. You're doing your party a disservice. If you only care about winning the election, Democratic consultants, Democratic leaders, if the only thing you care about is winning an election, then you're doing your party a disservice. You're reducing the likelihood, in my opinion, that you will win, because you will have an untested Joe Biden who may simply be unprepared to face either Trump or DeSantis or maybe Nikki Haley in a general debate, in a general election debate. Or if he is ready, well, then, we didn't know it. We went in to the primaries not sure, and his support will be reduced going in. But if he isn't ready, better we know it at as early as possible, so we can find somebody who can do better and who is better than Joe Biden. Why does this matter so much? Well, we know Republican policies are bad. Now, not every Republican policy, not every policy pursued by Donald Trump was bad. He did bring about, a peace in Afghanistan. We are no longer in Afghanistan. That is good for the United States. I don't know if it's good for Afghanistan, but I mean, what we had put together was a puppet government that was completely incapable of rule. And that had been in large and in charge for 20 plus years. Maybe not large, but in charge for 20 years. That can't be good for the Afghan people. It's true, the Taliban is terrifying. No argument. But we cannot have a permanent empire, because when we pull out of countries where our corruption led to complete instability without our armies there, we can't just simply maintain that. It's not sustainable, and it's also not right. It's also not just. In the United States, we are seeing some good policies erupt from the local level, the county level, and maybe the state level. In Prince George's County, Maryland, the council there, which is far more progressive than it's ever been, or at least it's been in my lifetime, or my knowledge anyway, maybe going back to the 70s, has adopted and has enacted a guaranteed basic income pilot program. It's instructive to understand how come you have a progressive county council there. Up until last year, the council, they had elections in 2022. Up until last year, the council was pretty much a rubber stamp for the developers. We have seen that county become basically crisscrossed with highways. The developments have all been car-friendly, commuter unfriendly. In other words, no real public transit into DC, no good public transit except for the declining metro system, which is not properly funded. We have seen ever worse traffic jams. The air is not good because of all the vehicles, the cars. There are developments without sidewalks, without bicycle lanes, without bicycle paths, with lots of cul-de-sacs. So the traffic is terrible in the mornings in these communities. It's all come together in a way that has maximized profits for the developers of McMansions and upper middle class income and above condominiums. It's been terrible for the poor, struggling, working people and the middle class, middle income folks who've lived in Prince George's County. Many are priced out. Many cannot afford, the necessities and can't find a job or can't find a job that pays enough, except maybe 2 or 3 jobs working retail. Finally, because interested citizen activists and advocates for the county took on a gerrymandered map put together by developer-funded incumbents who drew a map that placed each of them in safe districts, all Democrats, they're all Democrats, place all of these corporatist, real estate development friendly council members in safe districts, and then drew, connected with octopus looking districts, several progressives where they were connected to, where their districts basically were far flung, but with cores that encompassed whatever were, the most progressive districts where younger people lived, where people of color lived, who tended to be the more progressive elements in the Latino and African American communities. But the gerrymandered map, developed in secret, sprung on the county council at the last moment before the vote on the map, was challenged in court and rejected. And a much more representative map was imposed instead by a citizens committee that was implemented for that very purpose of drawing a representative map. And the result was the most progressive county council in many, many years. And what they have determined to do, using their power to make life a little better for struggling folks in Prince George's County. And that means implementing this pilot program to, did you see the flash just now? It's kind of weird. I don't know. Anyway, implementing a pilot program to guarantee income for some low-income residents. And it's a lottery system. So it's not like everyone, if you're below a certain income or you have a certain number of kids or what have you, it's a lottery system. So we're going to watch how this works out. And here's the details from the Prince George's County Council news release. Low-income families will get direct cash assistance, basically a check. No strings attached or repayment requirements. Crystal Oriata, who is a first-term council member, very progressive, was elected as a direct result of the rejection of the gerrymandered council map, has been the spiritual leader of this movement and the guiding light. She is herself from, I believe, a working class background. She knows whereof she speaks and works. She's hoping this will address generational poverty and build economic stability. I am too. I think there's some really good ideas within this program, and they do pattern it after one in Stockton, California. By the way, if you're familiar with UBI or Guaranteed Basic Income, either you have taken advantage of a program such as this, or you know someone, a family member or friend who has gotten a Guaranteed Basic Income either in the United States or elsewhere, would love to discuss it with you. 240-363-7190, 240-363-7190. The basic point of this program today, and I'm always looking for alternatives to the duopoly. The Democratic Party is not going to change America to the degree that we need change. It is not going to wrest power from corporate elites. It is not going to respond to the climate cataclysm. It's simply not going to do that unless there's a credible, consistent, persistent challenge to it from the left. There has to be an alternative to the Democratic Party, or we will not have, I hate to make it sound so apocalyptic, but I really just don't know what else to tell you. We've had 7-8 years, whatever it is, of the hottest weather ever, the hottest climate ever. It keeps getting worse. We are on pace, despite all our efforts to implement sustainable energy solutions. We are on pace for, I believe, the most greenhouse gases emitted in any year. I think 2022 was the worst. I'm pretty confident of that. I say that with some degree of certitude based on having read it, and 2023 may become even more destructive to what's left of our wilderness and our and ecosystems because of the climate cataclysm. We need an alternative to both parties, and especially we need an alternative to the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party itself is an alternative to the Republican Party. That's where we are right now. Why? Well, because if we don't move in a different direction, we really are looking in within the next few generations to a largely uninhabitable earth where just a few wealthy families lord it over everyone else. That is the sad reality I think we're facing. But there's another reason. We don't have to go in that direction, and we can see when good government does impose, maybe impose is the wrong word, when good government enacts good policies, it makes life better. It makes things better for people. So cash stipends for 24 months to ensure the financial security of families, reduce debt, and increase financial equity. And by the way, I love direct payments. Much, much more so than, say, food, than SNAP, or some sort of Section 8 housing. Here's why. When you give a family, an individual, the money, the resources themselves, you give it to them, they can choose how to spend it. So vendors, land owners, landlords, lady lords, whatever the term, what landladies, landlords, yeah, they can. I want to be. I don't want to be gender specific. I want to be gender neutral. So lessors, let's say it that way, will want their business. If you take Section 8 housing and if you take Section 8 tenants, then you have an incentive. You don't have much of an incentive to keep up the property for them. They're not paying you as much. You know they don't have that much money in their pocket. You know they're poor. They're not going to maintain the property as well as you would like, presumably, because they just don't have as much money. But when the individual renter or the family has the money in their pocket, then of course you're going to want to cater to them. It's exactly the same when you talk about SNAP. When we talk about SNAP assistance, supermarkets and the like, there's certain foods that, they can sell, certain foods that they can't sell. You get into this issue, which, by the way, I don't think and I've said this before, if you're going to have SNAP, I don't think non-food items like Doritos, snack foods that are unhealthy, that make you less strong and make you obese, I don't think those should be covered. I do think, though, that people should get to choose what they purchase with their own cash. Now, maybe what we will need to do with these programs is educate people better about how to eat a healthy diet. One thing that many families don't have is a kitchen or the time to prepare healthy meals. Presumably, hopefully, I can say with some optimism that if you give cash to a family so that they're not required to work 2 or 3 jobs just to stay in their not very nice apartment, then maybe they'll have the time and the resources to prepare and eat more healthfully. Certainly, that's not unreasonable. That's a legitimate hope. So we're looking at policies that local governments have been enacting. We know the federal government is largely on the side of the billionaire class, or almost 100%. And to the extent that there are policies that may make life better for a few of us, like Obamacare, in the end, all that policy did was put the big pharma corporations and the for-profit healthcare industry even more firmly in charge, as simply more money went directly into their coffers. In Baltimore, Maryland, where I live, I don't live in Baltimore or Prince George's, but I live in Maryland. In this state, they have had, in the largest city where there's very high rates of poverty, a program to help struggling families with very young kids through a universal basic income, which certainly Andrew Yang championed back in 2020. And I'm not a big fan of Yang's either, but this was a good idea. I've heard some criticism too, well, we don't want to just give people money. It basically, and this was an argument I heard. And I'd like your thoughts on it, 240-363-7190. Ultimately, this argument goes, a universal basic income is a capitalist response to a crisis that we face, because it makes poorer people, it simply creates more affluent consumers who will therefore buy more products that are manufactured by the capitalists and that are sold by capitalists. So really, it's just a stopgap. It doesn't take on the real, the kernel, the nut, the core of the problem, which is a for-profit capitalist system. Well, I don't buy that. And I'll tell you why I don't buy it. Because I believe a market economy, not necessarily capitalist, but a market economy in which buyers and sellers come together to exchange the goods that they need to live and that they may also wish, is a very rational basis for organizing a society economically. And when you give cash to struggling families, when you have a basic income of $1,000 a month, which is really nothing, it's not enough. It's just a supplement. But even just that little amount of cash in the pocket of a single mom or dad or a struggling family, even that small amount of cash allows the family to be a more active participant in a market economy. And I don't think that's in and of itself a bad thing. The desires, the wishes, the preferences of poor families should also be reflected in the goods and services that the marketplace makes available. The problem with the market economy isn't the one that we have, isn't that there's markets. The problem is that they're completely controlled from above. It's kind of the converse or the mirror image of the communist system where unelected bureaucrats make decisions about markets, and they invariably don't make good decisions. Well, the same is true in our rapacious crony capitalist system, where a few unelected corporate chieftains make available in the marketplace what is most profitable for them, while repressing and suppressing competition. We see this in so many different areas and ways. One example is the homeless crisis. The marketplace doesn't generate sufficient, inexpensive housing that is necessary. It just doesn't do it. So we need to obviously tweak the system. Another area where the marketplace, at least as it's currently constituted and without and with the type of government intervention that we have, is it leads to remarkable concentrations of wealth, not seen since, according to one pundit, the days of the pharaohs. So markets work when they're well regulated, when they're overseen by the government, meaning us, and when no one is allowed to get to be so wealthy that they can corrupt the ordinary businesses in the market. There are also issues that go to products that are harmful, destructive, and that's why you need regulatory agencies. That's also why you need a smart tax system. We'll get to that in a little bit when we talk about clean green energy, Texas, Norway, and electric vehicles. Right now, though, I want to stay a little bit longer on guaranteed basic income. Call me 240-363-7190. Baltimorean Kayla Brown struggled to keep a job since the birth of her son last year. And this article is from 2022, so she was pregnant in 2021. She had to quit her job as a hospital food service worker because she had a 1-year-old at home. Makes perfect sense, doesn't it? Single mom, no one else take care of him, so she had to do it. Do we want to say, okay, well, go live in a car? Find somebody's couch to sleep on if you can find one. Go to emergency shelter. Are those good solutions for our society? Or is it a better one to say, okay, you're going through a rough time. It's understandable. You have a very young child. We're going to make sure we as a society together through our government are going to make sure you have the resources you need to live. And we have done that. $1,000 a month, not a huge amount. Maybe it's not nearly enough, but along with, I guess, other resources she may have, she's able to make ends meet and live a decent life for her and her son. She says, I have to make sure I have a roof over my head. It was hard before the extra income. Still rocky, right? It's not $1,000 a month. Ain't no, lottery. But she can make it. So this seems to me a wholly laudable program. Now, it would be nice. It would be nice if it weren't necessary or were less necessary. And there are probably ways to get to that place. One thing, if we had, much better support for young parents. So there were nurses, social workers, and the like who could come out and provide support when necessary, and guaranteed daycare. Still, for very young children, for nursing infants, daycare is not ideal. We want to have parents with their newborns. So even if we're going to say, well, maybe by the time the child's 18 months old, 2 years old, the mom, the dad, the primary caretakers can go out and work to support the family, that would only be viable if we had high quality, inexpensive, better yet, free childcare. And again, I don't think we want that for any kids who are under, I would say at least 2, maybe a little older than that. When I think about my children, I wouldn't want my kids going to childcare until they could talk. But that's just me personally. 240-363-7190. Again, maybe I think we do want a society where people have work, where they do work. There's a lot of reasons for that. There's a productivity angle. Of course, we want productive citizens. Also, people feel better when they're productive. But the jobs have to be fairly paid. There have to be also room to succeed, to rise up in the ranks, and they need to be living wage jobs. We must have policies that provide that, or the only solution is going to be this universal basic income. And I bring all this up again. I mean, I don't think this is necessarily news to people, certainly that this is what I believe. But if that is important to you, if these policies are important to you, we've got to figure out a way, not just to not elect Donald Trump to a second term, not just not to keep Ron DeSantis out of the White House. We've got to figure out a way either to scare the Democratic establishment into being progressive, or electing leaders who are not beholden to the Democrats. The polls right now show DeSantis and Trump ahead of Joe Biden. Unless we have debates, unless we have a credible challenge to the Democratic Party from the left, I just can't see government moving in the direction we need it to move for our most needy citizens, for all of us, and frankly to save our planet. And we can do it. I'm presenting some of these stories. This is from this week's New York Times Magazine. Came out today. The Sunday magazine came out today on Tuesday. I don't think this is a perfect program in Norway, but it shows you that when government is representative of the people, of the citizens, and committed to better outcomes, you get better outcomes. 80% of new cars sold in Norway are battery powered. Air is cleaner, the streets are quieter, and the grid hasn't collapsed. Now, the reason they make the comment about the grid hasn't collapsed is because the scary, the fear, uncertainty, doubt is, well, with all these electric cars, we're not going to have enough electricity. It's kind of ridiculous because electric cars are so much more efficient than gas and diesel powered ones. In other words, 1 gallon of gasoline, if you were burning it to create electricity, generates enough power to drive an electric car over 100 miles. So my Tesla has the equivalent. I drive a Tesla. I love it. Not perfect. There's some problems with it. Can go the equivalent of over 100 miles on the same amount of energy, on the amount of energy that's generated by a gallon of gasoline. So if you have a car that drives 30 miles to the gallon, my Tesla goes more than 3 times farther on the same amount of energy. And it's also cheaper. It's the savings are greater even because electricity is in general cheaper than fossil fuels at the pump. What has Norway done? I have been saying if you listened to me back in the Monterey days or read some of my writings, my scribblings at halginsberg.com or on dagblog.com, I've consistently urged a fossil fuels tax, an FFT I call it, by making the cost of fossil fuels more expensive. The market, and this is why, again, I'm actually a pretty strong proponent of market-based economies. Well, I don't really know of any other alternative. But the incentives that we can create for what I call the goods, not the bads, are infinite. And I always say tax the bads, not the goods. So what are the bads? The bads are fossil fuels. The bads are imports that put American workers or domestic workers, if you're in a different country, you don't want to say American, if you're in Norway, Norwegian workers, domestic workers, out of work. Those are the bads. Pollutants are bads. Foods that make us unhealthy, quote foods, unquote. Foods, let me see, can you see that? Foods that make us unhealthy. Those are all bads. That's what we should be taxing. In Norway, that's what they've done. And the result, as you will see momentarily, has been quite salutary. So let me see. I don't want to transition. Let me do this here. Get that other clip up in a sec. The way they got, and again, I just really, really like taxes. I really do. And I was a little bit, when I read this article or when I first started sort of thumbing through it, my attitude was, well, what they're doing makes sense, but it's not as good as just raising taxes, because that's what I always want to do. But when I went through this article just a little more closely, I realized they're doing exactly what I think they should do in Norway. They are raising taxes. So going back to the 90s, Norway's been promoting electric vehicles. And how do they do that? They made the competition, the gas-powered vehicles, the diesel engine vehicles had to pay taxes. The owners of those vehicles had to pay taxes, whereas you were exempted from paying those taxes if you bought a battery car. So no value added or import taxes on the battery powered vehicles and no highway tolls. Another way to look at it is, if you drove a gas powered vehicle, if you drove a diesel car or truck, you had to pay all these taxes. It cost you more relative to an EV. And the result, exactly what any Econ 101 professor would tell you. When you raise the price of any particular good, the demand for substitutes goes up. So the price of consuming gasoline and gas-powered cars went up. The substitute electric vehicles saw sales rise. And they've continued to rise and continue to rise until now they're 80% of the number of cars sold in Norway. It's a huge advantage. This is what good government, smart government policy results in. Now, I don't love the second part of this the second paragraph on the screen, because I don't like when government chooses winners and losers. The government subsidized the construction of fast charging stations. I guess there's no alternative, right? They had to have those. But in the end, the most efficient way, I think most economists would say, is just let the private sector create rules for the private sector, set up places on highways where they can create or generate power, plug-in stations. And maybe that's what they did. Maybe that's all they did. I don't really know. I just don't want government saying, we like this company, we don't like that. We like this form of clean green energy, we don't like that. What works in one location may not work in another. Norway, very far to the north, solar energy, yes, they have it, but the rays of the sun are not direct there. There's a lot of wind, there's a lot of tidal power. Those might be a more efficient way to generate energy. It seems to me, the best way to see a great explosion of clean green energy produced is simply by raising the cost of its competition, its competitor, which is, of course, fossil fuels. In any event, what they did in Norway has worked. We need to adopt a similar model. We're the number one or now number two top generator of fossil fuels in the world. Unless we rein ourselves in and rein China in, the problem will only get worse. And I note, even with the salutary movement in Europe, especially we just saw in Norway, but in other countries too, where they're generating more and more power from sustainable sources, we still in 2022 generated more fossil fuel energy than we ever did before, i.e., we pumped more greenhouse gases into our only atmosphere we have last year than we ever did before. I think 2023 is on for a record. So, what are the benefits? Why would we want to do this? What would we get out of it if we adopted a much more aggressive policy towards greenhouse gases, a much more aggressive policy to reining them in, reducing the consumption of natural gas and oil and coal? What would we get? Well, you can see that things are a lot better in Norway. Various pollutants are much less of a problem than they were. Smog, asthma, and other ailments have fallen sharply as EV ownership has risen. And this chief engineer for air quality, Tobias Wolff, says no more, we're almost done with nitrogen oxides. But this is no panacea, folks. Still a problem with unhealthy microscopic levels. In fact, it's a bigger problem now because of EVs. The weight of electric vehicles, the batteries are so heavy, and this is true. My Tesla weighs 2 tons, so it's about 33% heavier, maybe twice as heavy as my old Prius was. Because of that weight, they cause more damage to the roads. They cause more rubber particulates to enter the air. And they cause health issues as a result of that. So ultimately, the solution is just fewer powered. No, let me say it this way. What we need are more and more human-powered vehicles. Human-powered vehicles. And the way you get there, you just tax the bads. You tax gasoline, you tax coal, you tax natural gas, but you also have to recognize that Teslas and other cars have rare earth metals, which mining of them causes major problems, and also just the weight. I mean, you charge a significant tax for the weight of the vehicle, since it causes the damage, the problems that we're seeing right on that screen. We can solve these problems. Smart government policy married to truly honorable representatives who are motivated by doing what's best for the public can get us out of the mess we're in. I don't think there's any other solution. And the only way we can get there is if we are able to credibly challenge Democratic candidates from the left. Otherwise, they just, once they're elected, even if they, with all the good intentions in the world, they are so quickly corrupted. We're AOC. She didn't put on her walking shoes and join Amazon workers on strike. She actually voted to, I mean, it's amazing. She voted to make it illegal for the railroad workers to strike. Every Democrat voted for Hakeem Jeffries to be the House Minority Leader. They're not our allies, folks. And the only way they will ever be our allies is if they're afraid that we'll vote them out of office. People on the left, Democrats, and if you're further to the left than you're a mainstream Democrat, I've tried hard to say, no, we can't we can't just say any blue will do. We have to be willing not to vote for Democrats if they don't support. They're not doing what's right for us. I find that argument just has not convinced people. I still hear over and over. Heard from Billy yesterday. Great to have Billy call. Thanks, Billy. And by the way, Billy, if you haven't yet, anybody else, please click subscribe. You can see the square, the blue and white square on the right bottom corner of your screen right now. Please click subscribe and share. The more subscribers, obviously, the better. 240-363-7190 if you want to join me. Got a few more minutes left. Love your thoughts on all of this. But I cannot persuade Democrats that they have to go in a different direction than any blue will do. Maybe if they could vote for a Green Party challenger who they viewed as having a legitimate chance to win, they would consider it. Now, we didn't see that in 2016. We didn't see that in 2020. People mocked voters who chose Jill Stein. I think it was a perfectly defensible choice. I did vote for Jill Stein in 2016. Didn't in 2020, but I get why others did. I don't see any other way to get where we need to be as a society and where we deserve to be unless we're prepared to A, vote for more progressive candidates who run as Greens, and B, just simply to withhold our votes when Republicans and Democrats both nominate really bad candidates who will make things worse. I certainly believe that in 2016 was the situation. I was slightly less cynical about Joe Biden, maybe wrongly so. In the United States, we have a state that could have been, maybe could still be the Norway of clean green energy in the U.S., and that is Texas. Texas is the number one generator of wind-powered electricity, and I believe it's number two in terms of solar energy. It's the number one, unless I'm wrong, maybe I'm wrong here, could be California, could be maybe Hawaii with all the geothermal, but I think it is Texas. Texas creates more clean green energy than any other state, and by, I believe, a pretty significant margin. So here the headline is Texas is a clean energy powerhouse. But unlike Norway, which has, it seems, apparently, smart government policy with smart government legislators and executive branch officials pushing clean green energy, Texas, we see just the opposite. And the clean energy boom there is very, very unfortunately being threatened by the Republicans who control the state in Austin. Number one in wind power, told you that. Fast-growing solar energy. Poised to become, they say, a renewable energy powerhouse. I believe they are already. 40% of their energy coming from clean green sources. This would be in the interest of the state because the infrastructure bill that the Democrats passed, insubstantial though it ultimately ended up, does contain billions in subsidies for the anti-fossil fuel industry. The problem is, and I've said this before, we don't need to spend more on clean green energy. We just need to spend far less. Well, we do need to spend more on clean green energy, but the way we get there is not through government subsidies. It's through, and actually we don't even really need to spend more on clean green energy. What we need to do is just cut out the fossil fuels. And the way you do that is you raise their cost. If you raise the price of gasoline, of coal, of natural gas, then people will naturally migrate to cheaper alternatives. But those alternatives are not cheaper now, or they're barely cheaper in some cases. We can get to the place we need to get if we just make coal, natural gas, petroleum more expensive with a high tax, and then return the revenues to the people so they don't suffer as a result of the higher taxes. Texas has an awful lot to gain from a green energy boom. And it's naturally occurring. The state has tremendous resources. The wind, I believe it's the windiest state. West Texas, you have wind for days on end, 50, 60, 70 degrees just blasting across the prairies there. If you see, there's a movie called The Wind with Lillian Gish, I believe. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it isn't Lillian Gish. I think it is. Where she moves to Texas from Virginia. She's kind of a mail order bride. And she goes crazy because the wind never stops howling. Day after day, week after week, month after month. It doesn't stop. So there's tremendous amount of wind there in West Texas, far West Texas. And it's south of the Gulf or along the Gulf of Mexico, and north of the Rio Grande. Texas is the southernmost state with the exception of Florida and Hawaii. So there's plenty of solar energy too. Almost direct rays. They're almost tropical, not quite. But the Republicans don't want to take advantage of this. Now, why don't they? I mean, to me, the answer just could not be more clear. It's obviously corruption. It can't possibly be some type of free market ideology or philosophy for several reasons. One, the free market is saying we want more wind. We want more solar energy. We're willing to pay for it. People will purchase it. And private industry and individual landowners are generating wind and solar power. So if you care about the free market, if you really believe in the free market, whatever that means, then you would embrace Texas's clean energy boom. But they're not. And why aren't they? Well, obviously because they're corrupt. I mean, they owe their positions to money from the fossil fuel industry. That's how you got elected to the state legislature. And it's really interesting to me that the Washington Post, much as they claim to be, and I think that Jeff Bezos wants, he's the richest man in the world, or Musk is, I guess. I don't know which one. I think both of their company stocks are down a little bit. I don't know which one's wealthier now. Look, he wants, he's got enough money to last 1,000 generations. I guess he wants 1,000, generations, hence his offspring to enjoy a clean, green planet. Or, for themselves. Not everyone else, who cares? But for them, yes. But so the Washington Post is actually telling you why in Texas they have the ability, the opportunity to really make a dent in the climate cataclysm, the climate crisis, by generating more and more green, clean energy. Why aren't they doing it? Well, one thing Bezos won't tell you is it's just flat out government corruption. Why not? Well, he's responsible for that as much as anybody, the buying and selling politicians. He bought a newspaper so he would be able to impact more completely on who's elected. He's one of the strongest pushers of neocon foreign policy, and even worse, neo-lib economics. Now, I think neocon foreign policy is awful. I guess I say even worse because there might be a slight reluctance on Bezos's part. I haven't really seen it, but I'm willing to believe it, to take on the military-industrial complex, to the extent that they're promoting endless war. But this guy is at heart a libertarian. He's always been one. He doesn't want any government regulations. He's made extraordinary amount of money from offshoring jobs, treating workers like crap, not allowing unions. He's part and part. He's part of the swamp, and he doesn't want you looking too closely at that swamp, even if the swamp is doing some things he doesn't like. So you don't hear about the corruption of the Texas Republican Party and the Texas legislature. That is the direct, the direct result of which is laws designed to hem and rein and reduce the generation of green energy. So what is the explanation the Post prefers? Renewable energy industry's lagging political support might seem surprising in a state where wind and solar have proliferated and where 40% of the power may come from carbon-free sources. But the industry as a whole has not excelled at coalition building, either within the business community or among environmental groups. Well, it hasn't excelled at coalition building among the Texas state legislature, which is where they need friends and allies to kill bills that are promoted by the fossil fuel industry. That's where they need a coalition to build. That's where they need friends and allies in the Texas state legislature. And they simply haven't spread out enough money. They simply haven't bought enough senators and delegates. That's the problem they face. None other. All right, thanks so much for watching. If you did, don't forget, click subscribe. Well, if you heard me say that, you must have watched part of it. Click subscribe in the bottom right corner. Like my videos. We're seeing the numbers go up. Very gratifying for me. I'll talk to you tomorrow. Have a great day.